On May 18, 1938, a boy named Michael was born into the family of Nelson Rockefeller. The Rockefellers were not just wealthy, they embodied the symbol of American elite. From an early age, Michael was surrounded by all the luxuries one could imagine. Living amidst a wealth of comfort and opulence that anyone would envy, he developed a taste for the exquisite. However, despite the outward prosperity, Michael felt like an outsider in this world. Watching his father, who was consumed by business and politics, he had no desire to follow in his footsteps. His inner world was much richer and more complex than it might have seemed at first glance. Nelson Rockefeller, despite his busy schedule, always found time for his passions, and one of them, collecting primitive art, was his true passion. The Rockefeller mansion had everything: statues of the Aztecs and Maya, ancient artifacts from South America, African masks, and Indian spears. Michael grew up in this environment, absorbing the spirit of adventure and a keen interest in exploration from an early age. However, instead of continuing his father's work, Michael felt a pull towards something deeper and more significant from a young age. His father, noticing his son's growing interest in art and culture, did not pressure him. Nelson realized that Michael would not be a successful businessman, but this did not cause him disappointment. On the contrary, he supported his son's aspirations and gave him complete freedom of choice. As a teenager, Michael began to show an interest in expeditions and exploration. He read extensively about ancient civilizations, and he was captivated by stories of unknown worlds and peoples living far from modern civilization. The Rockefeller home had rare books and studies that opened up worlds full of mysteries and adventures to him. This passion became a true escape for him from the world of money and power, where he felt out of place. As he grew older, Michael increasingly realized that his true calling was to explore the world. But his interests were far from academic studies. He craved personal experience, wanting to see for himself what he had read about to touch the mysteries of ancient peoples. Life in the Rockefeller family gave him the resources and opportunities to realize his ambitions, and Michael decided to use them to pursue his dream. This first chapter of Michael Rockefeller's life shows how a young heir to one of America's wealthiest and most influential families became a person whose aspirations were far from the traditional path. Michael did not want wealth and power. He wanted to find freedom and carve out his own place in the world. When Michael entered Harvard, his inner world began to take on clear contours. He chose to study history and anthropology, which became not just an academic interest, but a true guide in his life. Harvard, with its endless opportunities for research and learning, became the perfect platform for realizing his ambitions. It was here that he began to shape his plans for the future, dreaming of traveling to the most remote corners of the planet. During his studies at Harvard, Michael met Robert Gardner, an outstanding documentary filmmaker and explorer. Gardner was known for his films exploring the lives of distant and almost forgotten peoples. Michael immediately felt a kindred spirit in Gardner, a man who also sought to discover new horizons and immerse himself in unexplored cultures. Their acquaintance became a turning point in Michael's life. Gardner invited Michael to join his expedition to Western New Guinea, where they planned to shoot a documentary titled Dead Birds. This film was to be an exploration of the life of the Dani tribe, people living far from civilization, adhering to ancient traditions and customs. Despite his lack of experience in the film industry, Michael agreed because it was what he had always dreamed of. For him, it was a chance not only to see another world, but to become a part of it. In 1961, the expedition set off for Western New Guinea. Michael worked as a sound operator, which allowed him to be deeply involved in the filming process and interact with the local population. Every day on the island was filled with discoveries and amazement. Michael fully immersed himself in the life of the Dani tribe, observing their rituals, communication, and daily life. He not only witnessed another culture, but also felt its power and depth. However, it was not the Dani themselves that intrigued him the most, but the Asmat people, whose tribes lived even further into the jungles, in remote areas, far from any contact with the outside world. Michael was fascinated by their culture, particularly their wood carving, which was known for its complexity and mystical significance. He felt that this art could become the most significant discovery of his life, and that it deserved to be presented on the world stage. During the filming of Dead Birds, Michael began to contemplate how he could return here, this time with a specific goal: to collect a unique collection of Asmat art that could become the true gems of his family's museum. He understood that to do so, he would need to take risks and delve into the jungles, where civilization had not yet left its mark. The expedition to Western New Guinea opened a new world for Michael, full of mysteries and unknown cultures. It was a world he wanted to explore further, delving into its secrets and gathering evidence of ancient traditions while they still existed. Harvard gave him knowledge, and Gardner gave him the opportunity. Now, Michael was ready to take the next step on the path to his calling, and that step led him to the Asmat people, where his true destiny awaited. After returning from the expedition to Western New Guinea, Michael Rockefeller could no longer live peacefully in the world of New York. His thoughts constantly returned to what he had seen and experienced on the island. Life in the metropolis, surrounded by wealth and luxury, now seemed empty and meaningless to him. Everything that had surrounded him since childhood lost its significance. He longed to return to a world where people lived as they had for centuries, where there was no rush or hustle, and where every action had a deep meaning. Michael was determined to return to the Asmat, the tribes that had captured his imagination with their rituals and art. He understood that to do this, he would need to venture even further into the jungles than before, risking his life for the sake of his dream. But Michael was not afraid. On the contrary, he was ready to do anything to obtain unique artifacts that could become an important part of his family's collection. Michael's father, Nelson Rockefeller, saw this as a new beginning for his son. Although he didn't fully understand Michael's aspirations, he supported him. Perhaps Nelson saw this as an opportunity for Michael to find his own path, one different from the traditional route of an heir. He agreed to sponsor a new expedition and provided the necessary funds to organize the journey. It was an act of trust that Michael appreciated more than anything. Michael began actively preparing for the expedition, gathering information and planning the route. He connected with a Dutch anthropologist, René Wassing, who had extensive experience working with the peoples of Papua New Guinea. Wassing was not only a scholar but also a person capable of handling the difficulties that might arise in such dangerous places. Together, they started developing a plan for the expedition, which involved traveling to the most remote areas where no European had ever set foot. Michael understood that a challenging journey lay ahead. The Asmat were known for their secrecy and suspicion toward outsiders. They lived in hard. To reach areas, and even other local tribes rarely made contact with them. This was due not only to their geographical isolation, but also to their strict traditions, which were deeply rooted in their belief in ancestral spirits and the forces of nature. The wood carving that Michael so admired was not just an art form, but an integral part of their spiritual life. Michael knew that to earn the trust of the Asmat, he would need to show patience and respect for their traditions. He studied their customs and tried to understand how best to approach them without provoking hostility. But despite all the preparations, Michael knew that there would be many unknown factors in this journey, and that its outcome could not be predicted in advance. The expedition began in late 1961. Michael and René Wassing set off for the southwestern coast of Papua New Guinea, where the Asmat lived. With them were only two young assistants from local tribes, Leo and Simon. They were the only ones who agreed to accompany them on this dangerous journey. The rest of the locals refused, warning of the difficulties and dangers that awaited them in the jungle. When they finally reached Asmat territory, Michael felt that his dream was beginning to come true. The first encounter with the Asmat went better than he had expected. The tribe welcomed them, and they managed to exchange several artifacts. It was the first step toward collecting the pieces that Michael had dreamed of. However, he knew that the real treasures lay deeper in the jungle and that retrieving them would require not just courage, but also luck. Michael Rockefeller was ready to risk everything to achieve his goal. He believed that here, among the Asmat, he would find what he had been searching for all his life, a true sense of purpose and meaning. But for now, he had no idea what trials fate had in store for him in these wild, unknown lands. After the initial successful contacts with the Asmat, Michael Rockefeller felt that he was on the verge of great discoveries. But despite the warm reception the tribe had given him, he knew that the real treasures of their culture were hidden deep in the jungle, among those Asmat groups who lived far from the usual routes. These tribes preserved their ancient traditions in their original form, and they interested Michael the most. He was determined to venture deeper into the jungle, to those tribes that avoided contact with the outside world. However, this was not an easy task. The locals, who knew these areas well, refused to accompany him. Their excuses ranged from stories of the difficulties of the journey to warnings about the danger of encountering hostile Asmat. Michael knew that these warnings should be taken seriously, but his drive for discovery outweighed his fear. In these circumstances, Michael decided to rely on his instincts and willingness to take risks. He was left with only Wassing, as well as Leo and Simon, young local guides who agreed to continue despite the dangers. They set off, paddling through narrow rivers winding through dense mangrove swamps. The journey became increasingly difficult. The humidity and heat were unbearable. Mosquitoes and other insects attacked the explorers incessantly, and the sounds of the wild surrounded them, creating a sense of total isolation from civilization. During this journey, Michael delved deeper into the culture of the Asmat. He observed their rituals, studied their customs, and recorded stories told by the elders of the tribes. But most importantly, he continued to seek out rare artifacts that he hoped would become not just museum exhibits, but symbols of his personal discoveries and achievements. However, as they progressed deeper into the jungle, the tension among the expedition members grew. Leo and Simon, who initially agreed to accompany Michael and Wassing, began to show signs of unease. They said that it was dangerous to go any further and that the tribes they might encounter could be hostile. Their stories of cannibalistic customs and brutal rituals, still practiced by some Asmat groups, made even Michael question whether his venture was justified. But Michael was too engrossed in his goal. He felt that he was on the brink of discovering something truly great, something that would go down in history. This thought gave him strength and confidence that he was doing the right thing. However, he could not foresee that he would soon encounter what he had been warned about. One day, when the expedition stopped to rest at a small Asmat village, Michael decided to visit the local shaman, known for his prophecies. This old man, living away from the rest of the tribe, was surrounded by an aura of mystery and fear. Many locals avoided him, believing he had the power to predict the future and bring misfortune. Michael, however, wanted to learn more about the upcoming journey and perhaps receive advice from someone who knew this land and its inhabitants better than anyone. When Michael entered the shaman's hut, the old man silently studied him. Then, suddenly, he fell silent and began to stare intently into Michael's eyes as if he saw something hidden from others. The room was filled with heavy silence. The shaman said something to his daughter, who immediately ordered Michael to leave. Confused and puzzled, Michael left the hut, but as he was leaving, the shaman's daughter caught up with him and warned that her father had seen the mask of death on his face. These words sounded like a grim warning, but Michael did not take them seriously, dismissing them as mere local superstitions. However, his companions, Leo and Simon, took the warning seriously. They insisted on turning back, but Michael was resolute. He was confident that he could overcome any obstacles and that the greatest discoveries awaited him deep within the jungle. But the prophecy cast a dark shadow over the expedition, one that began to loom larger with each passing day. On November 17, 1961, Michael Rockefeller, Renee Wassing Leo, and Simon embarked on what would be their final expedition. It was a journey into the unknown, deep into Asmat territory, where they hoped to find the most unique and rare artifacts. Michael was determined to see the mission through, despite the growing unease among his companions. They crossed a river approximately 20 kilometers wide. The boat they were in was small and unstable, but Michael had no doubts about their success. However, the weather suddenly took a turn for the worse. The wind picked up, and the river began to churn under the force of the opposing current. The boat began to lose stability, and soon a powerful wave capsized it. All four were thrown into the water. For Leo and Simon, who had grown up along the banks of these rivers, swimming was second nature, and they quickly reached the nearest shore. There, they immediately set out for help, hoping they would be rescued before nightfall. But Michael and Renee Wassing were left alone in the middle of the river, clinging to the overturned boat, hoping help would arrive in time. Night fell, and with each passing hour, their strength waned. In the darkness and cold water, they realized that every hour could be their last. Michael, feeling that their chances of rescue were diminishing, made a decision. He resolved to swim to the distant shore, relying on his strength and luck. Renee Wassing tried to dissuade him, but Michael was determined. He couldn't stay idle. He had to do something. Wassing watched as Michael swam away, gradually disappearing into the darkness. It was the last time anyone saw him. Michael vanished into the night, and he was never seen again. Wassing remained alone, clinging to the boat, and was rescued only the next morning. But Michael never returned. A massive search operation was launched, involving local residents, the Dutch government, and the Rockefeller family. Planes and helicopters scoured the area. Divers searched the river for Michael's body, but all efforts were in vain. After 2 weeks, the search was called off, and Michael Rockefeller was officially declared missing. The official explanation for his death was drowning, but no one was entirely convinced. Michael was a strong swimmer, and his disappearance raised more questions than it answered. Local rumors began to circulate that Michael might have fallen into the hands of the Asmat, a tribe that still believed in ancient rituals, including human sacrifices. These rumors only added to the mystique surrounding his disappearance, turning it into one of the 20th century's greatest mysteries. Thus, what began as a quest for artifacts turned into a tragic and mysterious story filled with inexplicable events and prophecies that came true. Michael Rockefeller, heir to one of America's most powerful families, vanished in the jungle, leaving behind an indelible mark on history. His disappearance shocked his family and sparked a wave of concern and curiosity around the world. The Rockefellers, accustomed to controlling every aspect of their lives, now faced a situation that was beyond their control. They threw all their resources into finding Michael, hoping for a miracle. Michael's father, Nelson Rockefeller, personally traveled to Papua New Guinea, hoping to find his son alive. The search operations were conducted on a scale unprecedented for such cases. Planes and helicopters continuously circled the skies, combing every corner of the jungle and water bodies. On the ground, groups of soldiers, local residents, hunters, and guides searched for any trace of Michael, but all efforts were in vain. The jungles of Papua New Guinea held their secrets tightly, and Michael seemed to have been swallowed by the land. Officials announced that Michael had most likely drowned while trying to reach the shore. However, those who knew Michael doubted this version. He was an experienced swimmer, and many believed he could have managed the river's current. This uncertainty only fueled rumors and speculation about his fate. Soon, alternative theories began to emerge about what might have happened to Michael. One such theory was an attack by wild animals, such as sharks or crocodiles, which inhabited those waters. However, the lack of any evidence or remains cast doubt on this version. More sinister rumors began to circulate among the local tribes. It was said that Michael might have been the victim of a ritual killing. The Asmat, as some claimed, still adhered to ancient customs, including human sacrifices. These rumors were bolstered by stories that Michael might have been killed to capture his spirit and strength. Such theories were deeply troubling for the Rockefeller family, but despite all efforts, no evidence was ever found. These theories, although unconfirmed, sparked significant interest among anthropologists, journalists, and researchers. Many attempted to solve the mystery by exploring local legends and stories, but the jungle remained silent, offering no answers. Only vague shadows on the border between myth and reality continued to stir people's imaginations. As time passed, the search gradually ceased. The Rockefeller family, like everyone else, began to lose hope. Michael Rockefeller, heir to one of America's most powerful dynasties, disappeared, and the mystery of his fate remained unsolved. He was officially declared dead, but his absence lingered in the air like an unfinished chapter in the book of history. After the official search ended, Michael Rockefeller's story didn't fade away. On the contrary, his disappearance became fertile ground for endless speculation and rumors, only intensifying interest in this mystery. Over the years, new versions of what might have happened to the young explorer continued to emerge. One of these theories was that Michael might have staged his own death. Some believed that he could have decided to escape from his influential family and the pressures of society to start a new life. Support for this theory was found in Michael's unusual behavior in the months leading up to his disappearance. He seemed distant, lost in thought, and some of his acquaintances claimed that he spoke about wanting to leave. However, there was no evidence to support this theory, and it remained just one of many hypotheses. Another popular theory was that Michael was the victim of a political assassination. In those years, Papua New Guinea was under Dutch control, and tensions between the colonial authorities and local tribes were escalating. Some speculated that Michael might have become entangled in a political intrigue related to his name and family connections. This theory, too, did not develop further due to the lack of concrete evidence. But the most shocking theory was the possibility that Michael Rockefeller had been captured and killed by the Asmat. This theory was based on accounts from local residents who claimed that the tribe might have killed Michael as part of a ritual associated with cannibalistic traditions. According to this version, Michael could have been sacrificed to capture his spirit and power, as was believed in their ancient rites. This could explain why his body was never found. Although this theory seemed too brutal and terrifying for most, it gained support among some anthropologists and journalists who studied the customs of the Asmat. However, evidence to support this theory was never found. The local people probably knew more than they were saying, but remained silent. Perhaps they simply didn't want to reveal their secrets to outsiders. For many years, various researchers and journalists tried to uncover the truth about Michael Rockefeller's fate. From time to time, new testimonies and stories emerged, but none could be confirmed. Every step forward was accompanied by new questions, and instead of solving the mystery, it only deepened. The Rockefeller family eventually accepted the official version of Michael's death by drowning, though this decision brought them no relief. Michael's disappearance remained one of the most mysterious stories of the 20th century, surrounded by numerous theories, rumors, and speculations. And as time passed, interest in this story did not fade. This chapter in the story of Michael Rockefeller, like his fate, remains unfinished. Even decades after his disappearance, people continue to try to solve the mystery of what really happened in the wild jungles of Papua New Guinea. Years passed, but the mystery of Michael Rockefeller's disappearance continued to haunt his family, researchers, and journalists. With each passing decade, his story grew with new versions and myths that only heightened the fascination with this tragic enigma. The Rockefeller family tried to come to terms with the official version of drowning, but for many, especially those close to Michael, it was difficult to accept. The absence of a body, the uncertainty, and the rumors created a constant sense of incompleteness. From time to time, new evidence and claims emerged from people who insisted they knew what had happened to Michael. Some claimed to have seen him among the Asmat years after his disappearance, saying he had supposedly lived with them, adopting their culture and customs. Others spoke of secret negotiations that local authorities had conducted with the tribes, attempting to ransom or retrieve Michael in exchange for valuables. But all of these accounts were either unverified or outright dubious. Despite the skepticism, many researchers continued to seek the truth. In the 1970s and 1980s, several anthropologists traveled to Papua New Guinea to solve the mystery. They tried to establish contacts with the Asmat tribes, using local translators and promising safety. These expeditions were partially successful. They managed to gather additional information about the tribes, their customs, and life in those remote areas. However, none of the researchers found convincing evidence that Michael had been killed or that he had survived. Particular interest was sparked by the stories of some Asmat elders who hinted at the possibility of Michael's ritual murder. But none of them spoke directly, and each time the conversation turned to Michael's fate, the atmosphere grew tense, and the discussion was abruptly cut off. These episodes strengthened the belief that the tribe might indeed have been involved in his disappearance, but again, no direct evidence was found. In parallel with these investigations, journalists and documentary filmmakers continued to cover the story of Michael Rockefeller, creating films and reports that repeatedly rekindled interest in his fate. In the late 1990s, a documentary was released that revisited all the possible versions of his disappearance, including the theory of ritual murder. This film caused a stir, especially in academic circles, but again failed to answer the main question: what really happened to Michael Rockefeller? Meanwhile, the Rockefeller family, despite all their influence and wealth, continued to live with this painful mystery. For them, Michael's story was not just a tragedy, but a constant reminder of how little even the most powerful people can control their destiny. They tried to leave this story in the past, but each time the world reminded them of Michael, the wound reopened. In the early 2000s, new information emerged that once again stirred public interest and brought attention to Michael Rockefeller's story. This information came from a researcher who had spent several years studying documents and local accounts, as well as interviewing Asmat elders. He claimed to have found evidence that Michael Rockefeller had indeed been killed and eaten by the Asmat tribe in a ritual ceremony. This researcher, an anthropologist by training, managed to obtain several photographs and recordings that, according to him, confirmed this theory. The photographs depicted ritual objects and scenes that the researcher believed indicated Michael's sacrifice. These materials were presented as new evidence capable of shedding light on the mystery of his disappearance. The release of these materials caused a sensation. While some considered them authentic, others questioned their validity, pointing out the lack of irrefutable proof and obvious signs of forgery. The scientific community was divided between those who believed in the new version of events and those who remained skeptical. However, these materials once again reignited interest in Michael Rockefeller's story, attracting the attention of not only researchers, but also the general public. Despite these new findings, the Rockefeller family refused to comment. They did not want to reopen old wounds or stir up a past that had already brought them so much pain. They accepted the official version of Michael's death and tried to move on, leaving this tragic chapter of their lives behind. For them, it was more important to remember Michael as he was, a passionate explorer eager to discover worlds unknown to most. Nevertheless, discussions of the new data continued in cultural and academic circles. Michael Rockefeller's story became one of those mysteries that continued to captivate people with its unresolved nature. Everyone who was interested in his fate contributed to the story, trying to find answers to questions that seemed destined to remain unanswered. In the end, despite all the new theories and hypotheses, Michael Rockefeller's fate remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. This story symbolizes not only humanity's desire to go beyond its world and explore the unknown, but also its vulnerability in the face of forces beyond its control. Michael Rockefeller, an explorer and heir to one of America's most powerful families, disappeared in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, leaving behind questions that have yet to be answered.